Okay, so you might be opposed to some idea.
Yeah, just say just opposing idea, just being contrarian, like you don't like the new policy at work. Like, is it because you have actually some principled stand against it, or do you just want to be like gain attention from other people who are against it? You're just against it because it gives you attention, as opposed to against it because um, you're trying to actually work on some principled answer.
So you gave those are the cool examples. Were there any others?
Um, Let me check. I just read it, so
I found the one of changing opinions very interesting. Although
yeah.
you can have someone who has one set of opinions because they get it from one person. So
Mhm.
that would also be an instance of this social metaphysics.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of that, like, just because you're rebelling doesn't mean you're actually independent. Just
Yes.
like you can be a conforming nonconformist, that you're only nonconforming because everybody else is doing it
Yeah.
in a very high school sort of way. Or another example might be that somebody who looks down on everyone's like, oh, they don't know how great I am, and they might say God understands how great I am, but nobody else gets me, and
But why is that?
other people might hate me, like because you're dependent on their view of you. Like you're just transformed to like you only care about what God sees of you, not like what you see of yourself or what other people. Like it doesn't have to be necessarily other people, but something outside yourself judging you and deciding for you. Um,
That God, I didn't quite get the God one though. Like, okay, if you're
mm,
dependent on other people, how does it work that now you're dependent? What does that have to do with God?
let's see. I don't. Maybe that's not a great example because well, you could just think of it like I think I'll drop that one actually because that's a bit of a confusing example. I probably have to give you too much context of the other in the example.
But I think the essence of the example you gave with the changing opinion,
Mm-hmm.
or no, the rebelling against something, not because you have a specific principle that's in it's the principle is independence because you're dependent on other people. You want to go against whatever they're doing, but it's not because you've got a specific path you've chosen to take independent of their actions. It's more
Right.
like they took that path, so I will take that path, the other path. So you're still dependent on them. I get
Yeah.
that one, but religious one isn't as clear.
I mean, then there's maybe just a typical narcissist that just seeks approval from everyone. They want to make everyone happy just because it makes them feel good, not because there's a reason for it. It's just they want that social approval. They just want to gain the respect of somebody else for its own sake. Like that's their reason for living practically. I mean, it
Yeah,
can go some,
but
and even said, I mean, there's sometimes like some people don't go all into this. Like you just show it sometimes. It's not like a constant thing. I think he was clear that these are some more extremes, but there are less extremes. So it wasn't as much as it's almost better than when Peacock does it because Peacock you just gives the two extremes and that's it. This is
yeah,
like there's some extremes, some less extreme, some everyday examples
yeah,
of what the social metaphysician does about ways of being dependent on others, mentally speaking. Not it mentions nothing about work or anything, just as far as thinking. That's all it talks about.
yeah. Although again, I still wouldn't even speaking about that, I can't identify that in anyone I know. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, maybe in therapy there are a few people like that, but in I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but I always find it very difficult to go from here is the description of this phenomena and where is it in reality? I can't see it.
It's to me, it seems like one of those examples that somebody else came up with the concept. You still need to validate it because you haven't noticed it yet. But if you use their concept, even just like skeptically, like you're not sure about it yet, but you'll keep an eye out if you see anything that matches this concept. I think it's easier to do that once you've been introduced to the idea because like now you're aware of something to look for. and maybe you don't see it and you just throw out the concept, or you start seeing it and you begin to realize it was something there or that you didn't notice before because somebody gave you the concept to think with, and then you can validate it from at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the best example of any of that is just Peter Keating and the Fountainhead. So
Yeah, that was like the main
it's
example.
hard to, right. But that's kind of enough in the sense that you can take a few of his actions and then get an idea from there. Like it gives you a really good indication.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, let me keep letting me know what you're learning when you're going through that. I want to ask you, do you know any, are you ready to launch into some random questions before we begin there?
Yeah, I'll do a couple of those.
Okay. Do you know any good diagramming tools like for, if I want to draw like a tree diagram and connect ideas, or I want to do like a map of things, or I want to do like, mapping out a centralized history of different countries, or I don't know, just random things that I want to like mentally map out that are a lot of information.
I don't. I've usually just found it easier just drawing a notebook because
Yeah.
then I
Okay.
could just put it any way I want.
Yes. All right, cool. Skip that. Um, what about in terms of like memory work? Have you found, is there any like better way to conceptualize numbers? Because one of the downsides, I guess, is one, they're hard to remember, and two, like there's no logical when you're talking about the relationship between them, there's no they are quite hard to mentally hold. Like it's quite hard to mentally do things with them. Is there any work done on like, I don't know, reconceptualizing them in a different way? Because I remember reading about there's a kid, I forgot his name, Jacob something, and he went to like study physics at university at 13. And one of the ways his parents described his development was like he would spend a lot of time playing with all these like toys, mathematical toys, when he was really young, and they just encouraged him. And he didn't talk. That's what he did. And when they later interviewed him, he said he conceptualized numbers as like with sound and color and texture and all this stuff, and that's how he holds so much numerical
Yes.
information in his head. But we conceptualize it just with a symbol. And so I was wondering if I wonder if that could be like a conscious, because it sounds like um, he did that when he was young, right? So he's found a way to add so much more vividness to the concepts. And so like when you say 480 to him, it'll be way stronger. And so it makes sense that then he'd be really good at maths. And so I wonder if that's a thing you could consciously, not that I know anyone who's done that, but like, is there anything in that? And like,
Yeah, for
there is?
sure. I mean,
What
not
is it?
maybe not that way, but I mean, say there's people who enter like world memory competitions that they might have say memorize like 3 pages of all numbers just and
Yeah.
remember them in order. It's like to remember like 1,000 numbers
Yeah.
in 30 seconds. To
Yeah.
memorize it, just look through it, they memorize it, it sticks.
I
And
wonder
they
how
don't
long
have
that
any
lasts for.
special abilities, but how long it
Right.
what? How
How
long it
long that
lasts?
lasts for? Yeah, how long they can
Yeah, I don't
remember.
know, but they create a system with which they can
Yeah, okay.
map numbers to an image.
Yeah.
But it's kind of arbitrary the way you map it, but not any different than say a word has to be, say the word cow has to be a cow. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing that says it has to be the sound cow.
Yeah.
It's an association like that. So usually it's a system made out of like you take an image and like to relate 3 different numbers together. Like you don't know, you imagine Superman walking in the garden picking tomatoes, like, and that could be associated to a number. Like a certain action and a thing can be associated to a number, and then you just need to remember a series of images, and somehow with enough practice you can remember like I don't know thousands of digits in pi just from this method.
Because they still
And
use, I know some of that. They still use concepts. So like they'll go to
yeah,
units 9 and they'll use 0 and then they'll combine them as you get bigger numbers.
yeah,
But
it would be trickier to start to include other sensations, I'm not sure how well you could do that, but probably at a younger age it's easier. I mean, this is something you could learn as an adult and do and then remember extreme amounts of numbers or events or locations or anything like that. You just use this
Although,
kind of mapping system.
I don't know if that applies then to the manipulation of numbers since they're arbitrary units. They're like, 400 is, this perfectly ties into Funes the Memorius. But if 400 is like, a dog running, I don't know what 400 multiplied by 3.86 is. Like, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't really,
Yeah.
because now you're talking about a language and you're combining like dog running and cat singing. And you're like, all right, what happens when a dog runs into a cat that's it doesn't, it just doesn't, that doesn't work either. So,
Well, I was thinking like imagine associating the number 456 with the smell of roses. I mean, how does that help you multiplying 456 by like 28?
doesn't,
Like, but that's the system that kid used. So I'd almost want ask him more about what
yeah,
does he do? How does it work?
I don't know. But it sounds like for him, I didn't get it. I can't remember because I watched it ages ago, but it wasn't so much like just arbitrary, um, images, but like they had texture and other sensations, and then you could know these were compatible and these were not compatible. I don't, because he must have played with the toys. His
Yeah.
parents gave him all these mathematical toys when he was young that I guess help you like teach you certain basic manipulations with numbers, and maybe he did something from that. I have no idea, but it seemed to
Yeah.
work. So,
I think the
uh,
point would almost be that you can construct systems where you can remember huge amounts of things in a functional way. It just depends on finding the right system,
right,
which
but
is hard to do that, of course.
yeah. Well, the conversation we had about Anki is an example because like how do you, if you're talking about an essay, like what is it you remember exactly? You can't remember the whole essay by heart because that's not understanding, is it? And so what does it mean then to remember that? Like use a memory trick to remember that? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing that people can remember entire poems by heart, word for word, even what page it's on, just based on they can memorize it completely. And I
How
don't
do
even
you,
know how that happens, but they
oh,
manage it.
that's interesting. But what are the benefits of memorizing a poem? That's what I want to know. Like, because there's something like, there's different kinds of memorizing. So one would be if I memorized an essay in philosophy and I could read it word for word, does that mean I could then speak to you about the subject matter or not? Because there's that kind of memorizing where I'm just reciting it in a way and it's not really genuinely integrated. And then there's like reading a poem and now suddenly your language is infused with just sometimes you speak and your language is just infused with some of the poetry that you took from the author from memorizing it, if you know what I'm saying. Like there's
I
almost
think
two.
both happens. I think it's
Uh,
both really. Like if you memorize it, wrote, and just knew it all, but then once you memorize it, that would seem like, well, by nature you've understood or have automatized some, say, the use of meter or the use of rhyming or the use of certain words to describe things in a certain way, in a certain pattern. Like it gives you knowledge almost by memorizing it. And not only that, it gives
okay.
you the stuff to recall, to manipulate and think about. So if you ever want to think about the content of the poem, you just recall it and just start thinking about it, which I think is more
Mm,
useful in art than it is with, so you're going to memorize an essay in philosophy
yes, agree.
because there's
But
so
then the
much more
question,
to it.
yeah, so then the question is if you where does that what is the role of memorization then in philosophy? Because it's less like, as in it's not less, but you don't, it's less clear where that kind of skill would apply, which is, that's super cool, man. I'm motivated to find out how to memorize some poems now. So
Yeah, I know some books about that, about how to memorize things like that. I've read different books about how people memorize things.
yeah, I will I remember doing a bit, but I just forgot the method. Like I found it very difficult and not, you know, worked a little bit, but not in the same way that you see in like people in memory competitions or something.
Yeah, it was more amazing is because they don't have any like special gift, and they're it's not like they're some genius about memory. Like they can
Yeah.
say their memory is pretty normal. They just use these techniques and somehow it gets huge. They can like recite pi for like 3 hours.
Yeah. Not
Just
that
and
I'd
all
really
correct.
want to do that. I
No.
don't really care. That's
No,
stupid. I wouldn't want to do that.
No.
Poems though is pretty interesting. I'd love to memorize, like walk around with 50 poems in my head, then suddenly start speaking in rhyme.
Yeah.
Do you know Edmond Rostand, who wrote Cyrano de Bergerac?
Yeah.
He was called up to do like some kind of university speech ages ago, and then he started speaking in like lyrically, like he gave his whole speech and he just made it up on the spot in rhyme, and it took people a while to realize that he was speaking in rhyme.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, cool. Let's go. I want to go through Funes the Memorius, but I have a trick question for you first.
Sure.
I was thinking about if I've gone wrong somewhere here, but we're talking about a logical hierarchy, and I said, what is logical about a logical hierarchy? If logic is non-contradictory identification, then a chronological hierarchy is also a logical hierarchy. What is
Yeah.
what is going on there?
Logical hierarchy. Like what?
Because logic is non-contradictory identification, and then to me, chronological is logical also. So what's not logical about a chronological?
There's probably a better term you could use than that for that reason. Like there's probably a better term. I don't ontological hierarchy. I don't know. Metaphysical hierarchy. I think what other words you could use that would be more precise instead of logical hierarchy. But you're right. Like a chronological hierarchy should be logical in some way or another.
Yeah. So then what is, I'm confused. I'm still not clear on the distinction.
Well, chronological just being how you learn it, metaphysical being once you've learned all of it, how would you structure it? All the things in reality that exist, how you'd structure them. Even the things you don't know yet, how would they be structured?
According to what standard?
A standard of well, I would know existence is at the bottom, that what everything else depends on. Everything depends on being a existence existing and things like that.
We can look. Maybe we'll come back to it another.
Yeah.
I will definitely write on that. Do you want to go through Funes? Because
Yeah.
have you read it recently? Because I highlighted a lot. There's all kinds of things I want to talk to you about
Yeah.
Right,
I
and
read
tell
it
me
the
if
other day too. So.
sweet. Okay, cool. I can see why you picked that one too. Makes sense. Okay, let me share screen this. Just getting ready some stuff here. Okay, cool. So I'll tell you what I think I realized. I hated reading him, but now I'm realizing, okay, I sort of see the point of his stories. They're not necessarily entertaining. Like it's not like a book you read where you really care about the characters. But
Right.
the point is to start getting you to question certain concepts in a way you wouldn't have questioned before, or like just all kinds of things. So I'll summarize it first, and then I'll just tell you I'll go into more detail, and then you can tell me what you think of what I think. So basically, it's about what I got is about a boy in a village. He has an accident, then he develops some kind of infallible memory, and so he remembers everything in intricate detail. Like every moment of his life, he remembers. He remembers the angle he looked at something. He remembers like water splashing on some random date, and like the exact how it felt and how it sounded. And so he tries to develop a system of class. Like he starts thinking, well, why do we need 3 words to describe like, what was the example? It was something about a dog, I think. Like, like you've got descriptive concepts like what was the example he gave? I don't know, like a brown dog. Why do you need 2 words to describe brown dog? Why can't you have 1 word to describe that specific thing?
Yeah.
And so he tries to develop a system of classifying each thing in his memory and everything having its own word, including even classifying specific moments that like if you see a dog, it's not just that you see that dog and you give it its own name, but you saw it at that time. So it has to have its own unique, like it's like a serial number.
Yes.
And so the point of, I think, Borges, what I got from this is that he's trying to start, he makes you think about like, all right, well, what happens if we just named everything uniquely? Like, what is the relationship between memory and concepts? Like what would happen if you just had this infallible memory? Like, what would your life be like? He starts making you question those things. So that's now I'm seeing like what it's about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can go in more detail, but thoughts so far and what my overall
Yeah. I mean,
take on.
is that all of it? Or is
Yeah,
there more?
that's well, there's questions, but they're questions. That's just my
Yeah.
take on what I got so far
Yeah. I
reading.
think that's mostly it. But I think you maybe could have mentioned just that he was saying he can't think in abstractions. It just flatly said he can't think in abstractions because everything is like you got the dog and looking for the front at one moment in time, and then next moment in time the same dog. He can't abstract it. It's just each one's its own unique instance. He can't
Right.
abstract things. He can't think beyond that moment. So all he has is a series of moments, and that's all he has, and that's all he can think about. And he even
Actually,
described
yeah, go
he
on. Sorry.
described himself as like, my memory is like a garbage disposal. It's almost in a way saying like it's everything. Not only everything, it's the garbage too.
What does that mean? I actually highlighted that because I didn't get it.
Yeah, I think of it like even the things that are irrelevant, like it doesn't really matter what the dog looks like at exactly 3:46 p.m. on a Sunday. Like it does it. Do you need to abstract? Like you can retain that, but it's kind of like garbage. What's the point? Like, who
Right.
cares?
Right.
But even he retains that.
And I wrote that the logical endpoint is going from concepts to percepts to sensations. It's basically like there's naming, they go into an example later, but you're naming things to naming specific things to naming specific thing at a specific time to naming the specific thing at a specific time from a specific angle to just the specific moment. And then the sensate that's basically the logical endpoint of this, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And the end of abstraction, like he's just almost lower than an animal because he's just the only of these sensations, and he doesn't have even the time to think about like, oh, what's the point of life? What's my purpose? Or I want to
Mm.
study Latin, but now he can't even do that.
Okay, let's go through this in detail. I want to get how you read this. Like this stuff at the start was what threw me off, and then I was like, oh my god, I don't want to read this. And then later I read it
Yeah.
again because I read this. This made sense now because it's the Memorius is someone who has a good memory. This bit about I remember him.
Yeah.
Only one man on earth deserved the right, and he is dead. That was just super weird when I read that at the start. I'm like, what is this guy talking about again?
Yeah.
But let's see what else. Okay, here is I think where I start. Um, what is so? I mean, this was sort of a setup for him to get in touch with him. The fact that he wanted to learn Latin and borrow books from the author. But what is why like what's is it? Am I reading too much into it when he's talking about the letter was perfect and then the
Yeah.
orthography was a type sponsored by Anders Bello? What is he talking about there? Like,
Well,
does that
the
have any significance to the story at all?
not really, other than to say that he's a very learned man who's very intellectually sophisticated. The Funes, like he knows what he's talking about. He's not some ignorant guy out in the middle of nowhere. He knows how to write. He knows how to read. He cares about the classics and writing, but the details don't matter. Like I for Y, J for G is one that's in Spanish because that's the way of writing in Spanish. Make it all fancy.
Oh,
and it's
this
just
is
saying,
okay. This is fancy writing in Spanish. This I
yeah,
for Y thing. Oh,
because
okay.
like you're making the Y is makes the same sound as I in Spanish.
Right.
So I guess when you're doing it fancy, you can replace them and make it look extra fancy.
Okay, cool. I didn't know that. And then see, like I guess that's you probably need to know Spanish to be able to extract that then. Otherwise it's just random
Yeah,
information.
yeah, it wouldn't really mean much.
And what's this about when he solicited a loan for any one of the volumes to be accompanied by a dictionary for the better intelligence of the original text? For I do not know Latin as yet. I'm like, again, I read that and I'm like, what is going on? Oh, so what? What's the significance of that?
Um, Partly I feel like that's slightly an odd translation, but
Oh,
on the other
okay.
hand, I would even when I read in Spanish, sometimes it's like, what is he saying? I did do that sometimes, even in the Spanish. When I think this was like just saying that, like, I want a better understanding. I want to use these more sophisticated books to boost my understanding.
Okay.
Like the
And
original
then
text is smarter, wiser, and better.
got
So
it.
it's just showing him as he wants to learn. He's ambitious. He's got these great ideas about learning Latin.
Okay, cool. I sort of got this, but I didn't get what this added to the story exactly. God forgive me,
It's
but the
just a bit of
prestige
a
of
tangent.
it's
It's
so
almost like the
weird.
guy's relaying a story to you. It's like, oh yeah, well, it was weird that I was told my father was not in no way well. That's weird. But
And then
anyway,
he's but it's so over
that's
the
what it's.
top. And then he's talking about a contradiction between the negative form of news and the positive adverb of feeling the prestige of being the recipient. This always puts me off when I read stuff like this. All no doubt distracted me from the possibility of anger.
Yeah,
Good thing I chose to read on, but
it's almost written like a letter, almost more than a
um,
story. Like
yeah,
so even a letter, you'll throw in something that, like, yeah, why are you telling me that? I don't care. Continue with your
yeah,
story.
yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Guess you just need to read on. Um,
It's a weird thing
okay,
about his style. It's usually he writes as if it's either a letter or a literary journal or scholarly journal. That's just how he writes.
got it. These are true, right? Like Cyrus the king
Yeah.
who could call every soldier
Yep.
in. That's interesting. I wonder
Yep.
if they're myths or like, do you think that actually there were these things are,
I mean, it's believable. I don't
yeah,
know how true it is, but like
22 languages. This guy administered justice in 22 languages of the
it's
empire.
probably exaggerated a little bit, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Simonides was real. Aristotle even
Simon.
mentioned him once.
Who's Simonides?
Just a guy who created a method of loci
Oh, okay.
where you map things you want to remember onto locations in your environment and you pretend to walk through the environment in your imagination. And he
There's
created that.
Metrodorus who would repeat, like if you read something to him, he'd repeat it to you.
Yeah, I recognize these names.
Mm. Um, what's this reference here of like Christian, of blind, deaf, mute, somnambulistic? He was a Christian before. He had been like a Christian, memoryless before the accident.
I almost wonder if it's an insult to Christians. Like it was just a backhanded comment. Like I almost don't know if it's like that's just part of the character or is he trying to say something? I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
Or
Well, I
or it
guess
could be
the
a
lesson.
comment on or it could be a comment on Christianity. Like if you're a Christian, you would know that you don't really know anything. You don't really see the truth. You don't it's all given by God, that something like that, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I was curious, like, okay, so I get it. Now he has this infallible memory, but why is the present so rich and bright? Like, the present was almost intolerable. It was so rich and bright. It made me think about like, okay, if I had an infallible memory, I get that it's true of ancient and trivial memories because everything you can recall with like insane detail. But like, why do you think the present would be rich and bright if you had an infallible memory?
I almost think he's just describing like that feeling, like when you step outside after it's been dark and like you're blinded. It's like, oh my god, this is too intense. And remember, he just woke up from being paralyzed. It's like
Yeah.
being shook into awareness, and I think that's all it's saying. That it's like that's almost intolerable. It's so painful when you just shake into awareness like that. Then you realize he's crippled. He can't do anything more, and then then he was going on like, oh, my memory is now perfect. This accident did it, but the narrators told him like, no, you always had a good memory, but okay, you just do it even better now.
Yeah, I remember that bit as well. And I was wondering what the significance of, if there was any significance in that, the fact that his memory was already good. He was called the chronometer before because he always knew the time.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's just something more about his personality that like everything's melodramatic. That there's some tragic story to everything he does. There's a tragedy. There's something
for
melodramatic about it.
Funes.
For Funes, yeah,
Oh,
like he's very melodramatic. He's like, "What was me?" and like I'm too good for this.
um, yeah, here we go. The recollections were not simple. Each visual image was linked to muscular
Yeah,
sensation, thermal sensations.
yeah.
This is the garbage disposal. I think, yeah, I didn't get this. Like, I get now what you're saying, but why are dreams like vigils and memory is like garbage disposal because it contains irrelevant details, you said, which makes sense. But then
Yeah.
why are dreams like vigils?
I have more memories in myself. Almost like the dream is like a vigil of the end of the dream, I wonder? Or the vigils of,
I had to
well, the
look up.
vigil's like a funeral in a way.
Period of keeping awake during the time usually spent asleep. Oh, because they're vivid.
Yeah,
I
that's probably what
think
it
because
is.
they're vivid. Yeah.
It's so vivid, it's as if he's aware.
And he's there and you can watch it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Here's the one. 33 Uruguayans required two symbols and three words. So he'd rather have a single word and a single symbol.
Yeah.
And that was the first stimulus to his work. Um, yeah, and then in place of 7,013, this goes to our numbers thing. For example, how do I say that? Mashimo Perez.
Maximo.
Yeah, in place of whatever. There's all this stuff. And then
Maximo Perez. But yeah,
um,
ooh, connection.
each word had a particular sign, a species of marks or symbol.
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning to before. You associate a number with an image.
Yes.
And that much does work. And that's what he got from the books he read in Latin. Those books are about memory that he asked for,
Oh, okay.
which you wouldn't know unless you knew that fact outside of this entirely. I just knew the Naturalis or whatever book was about memory.
Yeah, there was a specific book in Naturalis.
Yeah, that's what he
So,
wanted those in particular.
so enumeration is counting, but it's also referencing, right? Because he talks about explain this rhapsody of unconnected terms was precisely contrary of a system of enumeration. Um,
Like enumeration should be like one goes to two goes to three, and just it's really strictly logical, not these associations. So you're saying, well, this doesn't make sense. It's just random associations. There's no necessary logic to this. I think that's what the narrator's commenting on. Like it's just arbitrary. Like that's what he's saying.
right.
Like it might be useful, but this is not a system of enumeration. He's criticizing him. Like this is you think it's a good idea, but it doesn't look like one.
Yeah, and it says you didn't even understand him or didn't wish. And
Yeah,
there's,
Funes is not even listening. It's like Funes is all absorbed in himself. Once they look at what I made and any criticism, he just ignores it.
Locke in the 17th century postulated and rejected an impossible idiom. An idiom is like a saying in which
Yes.
I think in which individual object, each stone, each bird and branch had an individual name. That's cool that he brings in Locke and then Histori
Yes.
Naturalis.
Yeah.
And then so Funes is even more extreme than that.
Yes.
And he's like, not only every leaf on every tree, but every one of the times. It's like like I mentioned before, like a serial number system.
Yes.
Uh, to have 70,000, which you would define numerically. 70,000 isn't even that much, but okay, so Platonic ideas.
It doesn't mean anything like really platonic, like other dimensions. I think it means just
Yeah,
abstract thought.
yeah. Right. So it's now talking about how his own face surprised him in the mirror. But that's interesting, because if you have an infallible memory, why are you surprised? Is that because you give us like that every time you look in the mirror has like its own unique
I think so.
serial? Hmm.
Like each moment is like different than the last. Moment to moment is just different than the last. There's no, it doesn't generalize into one. Just each everything. It's like living life in photographs, and each photograph is a different instant, a different moment, different thought, a different concept.
But it makes you think, like, I guess this is what's cool, right? It makes you think about it, because it is interesting that he says Funes could continuously make out the tranquil advances of corruption, of carries, of fatigue. He noted the progress of chill, of moisture. But like, if you've got an infallible memory, wouldn't you look back in the past and recognize, like, oh yeah, that's what my face looks like. That's what it looked like earlier. So why would you be surprised looking in the mirror?
I think it's just a loss of concepts, a loss of abstractions that you can't hold that in memory. Like you can't, in a way, it's saying you can't do both. You can't have an abstraction, but also this type of memory. To be able to remember everything, you can't abstract anything. But if you can't abstract anything, you won't have any abstractions. Because as soon as he starts abstracting, he would lose this precision.
Well, I still don't see why you can't have both. Like, um, if you have like infallible infinite memory, then wouldn't you could still abstract, you just be able to recall everything in much more detail, right? Like I still don't see why you couldn't abstract away if you had infallible memory.
Well, I guess if as a thought experiment, if you could in principle do that. But I think the story is really just saying that he's claiming that if somebody did claim that, it would not be possible. It would contradict anything we know about human thought and
Someone
human thinking.
claimed what?
If they claimed they had perfect memory, that they could remember everything, you're probably going to notice if that they were not going to abstract very much.
Yeah,
But I
I
guess you
didn't.
could.
I thought it was an optional connection. I wasn't convinced that, because the process of abstracting away is, if it's a conscious process of like putting away some differences, why wouldn't you be able to and then just summon up the relevant memories when you need them?
I guess that would make sense if it really was infallible. I would agree with you that that's how it should operate.
Mm.
But I think, given the limits of human consciousness, given the way human consciousness operates, that couldn't happen. You'd have to have some other type of consciousness to do so. Because the way our mind works, it doesn't seem like this is possible. I mean, Borges is really just mostly just posing you the question, and you can interpret Funes however you want. And like Borges usually writes in a way that the reader's supposed to make their own interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
I
interesting.
I do think the most important point of the story is that if you eliminate abstraction from your thinking, if you wave it away as irrelevant or just flights of fancy, then you're going to be stuck on this concrete level. Maybe you could do
You,
both,
sorry,
but
say that again.
if you wave away abstraction, just doubt it is worth, just say I don't want to abstract anything. If you said that to yourself, you would be reduced to this level of thinking of sensations only.
Right.
I mean, if you accepted abstractions and concretes, you would be okay. But if you only have the concretes, this is what you end up with. Just this mess that doesn't tell you anything.
There's a quote, William James, he described the mental experience of a newborn infant as a blooming, buzzing confusion.
Yes.
And then there's this here about they allow us to make out dimly or to infer the dizzying world of fullness. What did you, yeah, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to skip to the next thing. So just what were you going to say in response to?
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I think it's parallel to that. Yeah.
What do you make out of this? To sleep is to be abstracted from the world. So he tried to imagine a blackness.
Yeah, I mean, I think of dreams as always. They're just abstractions. They're not real. They're in some way abstracted, some ways imaginary and constructed. And saying Funes couldn't even abstract in his dreams. It's just a blackness that he has. There's no like sleep or dreams. It's just blank, or he's just observing the darkness.
Yeah, it says imagined a black compact made of a single obscurity. And that's how there was like a block of homes. I didn't quite get that bit about why I would imagine it as a black compact thing.
I'm not really sure. It just makes it sound like his dreams are blank. That's usually how I interpret it. And he can get all this information. To think is to forget a difference.
Yeah. You said to think is to forget a difference, to generalize, to abstract.
I think that's probably the most important line in the story. I love that line.
Yeah.
But Funes is just details.
Contiguous in that everything is separate, right?
Isn't contiguous is like there's no division, it's just endless. There's no bounds.
Let me look it up. Sharing a common border. So like every moment is its own thing, bordering the next rather than a continuous.
It just blurs together.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't quite. I mean, there are some, like, I get the point, but there were so many weird things in here, like this bit. I read his stuff, and he's like, he seemed as monumental as bronze, more ancient than Egypt, anterior to the prophecies of the pyramid. Unless I missed what this was about, but it seemed a bit over the top.
It's just poetry.
Yeah. Okay, cool. But yeah, interesting. I guess I enjoyed actually forcing myself to go through this, and I sort of saw that it just makes you question, just makes you start asking questions about memory concepts, what their role is, and that kind of thing. So it'd be interesting for like discussion groups.
I think the one thing to visualize Funes as is this is what concrete bound means. This is concrete bound thinking. That error of thought.
Yeah.
So this is what you could picture when somebody's skeptical of abstractions. When Peikoff says that in Understanding Objectivism, he means this. This is obviously an extreme case, but this is what you would visualize when you picture concrete bound, hates abstractions, things like that.
Yeah, it does seem like actually it's a cool way to open up a discussion about concepts, right? Without it being very boring and abstract, straight away getting into like, what is the role of concepts? Like that's too abstract and broad for
Yeah.
most people. But if you go into a story like this, I can see how you can begin with this and then ask questions based off the story. So,
There are real life examples of this.
oh, really?
Maybe not in the
What?
same way, but very similar.
Like,
There's
what
this
are
one
they?
guy. Let me look up his name. Like he could memorize so many things, but he couldn't think abstractly,
I
or
wonder
he was
what.
very bad at it. Let me look
Yeah.
up. Like he was extensively studied by one psychologist. Let's see.
But see, that's what I find interesting because I didn't know like why I didn't see why there would necessarily be a connection between better memory and less conceptualization. It wasn't
Yeah,
obvious to me.
yeah, very concrete memory. Let me look. Where is this? There's books. I know it's somewhere. The Mind of a Mnemonist. Let me find this book.
What do you think about? I put this down: the memory in a conceptual consciousness versus memory in a perceptual consciousness. What is the role?
Okay, say that again.
The role of memory in a conceptual consciousness versus the role of memory in a perceptual consciousness.
Um, yeah, role of memory and perceptual consciousness. That very concrete level, just like remember the location of food. I mean, there's not really much more to it. Just remembering very specific things that like animal, maybe its whole life, it only needs to know the location of like say 2,000 places for food.
Yeah.
Like a squirrel, it needs to know where 2,000 nuts were placed. That's all it needs to know. It doesn't need to know beyond that. It's enough to just remember specifically this moment, this snapshot of where it is, and that's enough. Memory for conceptual consciousness is more about being able to, well, think into the future, but also recall things in the future, like that you might need to know that to be able to pick up those concepts again, that you don't have to reform the concept every time. You have it there already. Okay, I linked the book I mentioned, or about the guy. Let me try to find his name, the actual person. But there's a couple things in history or real life people in the past 50 years that have like a perfect memory.
Oh, do you remember what? And none of them were conceptual.
The other person could be, or she is, but this guy, like it seems like maybe he was autistic even, or to some degree that he
It's
just remembered everything concrete, but not abstractions.
it's funny how like what's interesting that you can get people like that and you'd expect them to be geniuses, but they're not necessarily geniuses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is a thing in autism almost that you can remember vast sums of